Welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. If you enjoy our content, please like or subscribe.
Hi, welcome to Ellis Talker Show. I'm DB LeBron. Do you have things you want to get done around the house? Maybe, a pergola. Maybe you want to do something to your kitchen. Check out K&H Construction in Waxahachie. Chris Helms, he's a local guy, and let him know DB LeBron sent you. Today, my very special guest is Dr. Doug Cardell. He's an economist, educator, former congressional aide, corporate CEO, author of Amazon bestseller, Why Socialism Struggles. And Dr. Cardell has spent his whole life, well, he spent a good part of his life looking into this. So I wanted to have him on because in this country, there was actually recently a survey not too long ago that talked about the youth favoring socialism over capitalism. Something is happening when a system that has been proven wrong so many times in so many places is all of a sudden becoming popular. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Doc.
I'm happy to be here.
I would like, if you could, just kind of give a brief intro on you, the stuff maybe I didn't cover, and we'll kind of get into it.
Well, I think you covered most of it. I'm an economist, and I study how economic systems work and which ones work and which ones don't, and why they work and why they don't, and why people like them and why they don't like them.
So, there's so many. One of the things about economists is you get 10 economists in a room and you'll get 10 different opinions about how things are done. What is the differences in economists on how they look? Is it a bias that gives it, or because numbers are numbers, right? Or am I wrong?
Well, it's actually both. Part of it is bias. There are a lot of economists that start with an ideology and then try and frame an economy around that. But it's also because, yeah, it's true that numbers are numbers, but we don't know. It's really hard to tell what the numbers mean. The economy is kind of like the weather. It's basically unpredictable. And so you can get a lot of numbers about the weather, and it doesn't really help understand what's going to happen tomorrow. I can check real quick here. The forecast is already gone. I think the forecast today was supposed to be for 98. The high was 93.
Right.
And the same thing is true of economists. You look at 5 different weather apps and you're going to get 5 different answers because we're looking at systems that are basically chaotic. A guy named Lorenz in 1972 basically invented chaos theory. And what that is basically about is realizing that tiny, tiny changes in inputs can make gigantic changes in outputs. In fact, his famous quote was, "Can a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil precipitate a tornado in Texas?" And the answer is yes, because in a chaotic system, there are just so many variables that you can't possibly analyze them. In the case of economics, if I were to try and predict the economy with any precision at all, what I would have to do is basically be able to read the minds of 9 billion people.
That would be impossible.
Because
right.
the way the economy works, in order for me to make predictions, I have to know what's going to happen next. And the only way to know what's going to happen next is to know what all those people are planning. And even within all those people, their plans change. Yesterday, I had to order a couple of things that the day before I didn't know I was going to need. Well, that makes an impact on the economy. There's going to be a producer somewhere that's impacted by what I ordered. And there's going to be shippers and subcontractors that are all going to be affected by that order I made that I didn't even know I was going to make 24 hours before I made it. And so the problem is more that too many economists think they know what they're doing than that their predictions are wrong. I can make predictions, they can make predictions, but I try and be a lot more humble about it because I know that I can give a likely range. I can maybe say with 80% probability that something will happen within this 20% window. Kind of like the weather. I mean, I can make a pretty good guess about how likely it is to rain or how likely it is to not rain. I can make a good guess about whether it's going to be warmer today than it was yesterday. But that's about as good as we could do. And in fact, one of my big research projects was to look at the personal consumption expenditures, which is a good measure of what people are planning to buy. And I looked at what the Federal Reserve predicted. I looked a year later to see what would happen. They were right 46% of the time. You literally could have done better flipping a coin. And I'm not saying that the people at the Federal Reserve are in any way lacking. I couldn't do any better because it's a chaotic system. And you can't predict chaos. It's just the way it is.
What do you think? What do you think people get wrong when it comes to, other than the volatility of economics? What do you think people get wrong when they think about what controls this economy, and how does any one politician have, an outsized control in it? What do you think they get wrong with it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there may be people in politics that think they can control the economy. They're wrong. Because of all the things we just talked about, in order to plan the economy, in order to do something that has a known economic output, you have to be able to predict. And since nobody can predict, any interventions into the economy are probably going to be wrong. A real good example is to look at the environment. As human beings, we have a really poor track record of doing things in the environment. And while they've been well-meaning, they've most often screwed things up. And it's for much the same reason. It's the environment is also fairly chaotic, and it functions on what's called spontaneous order. That is, it's a self-correcting, self-directed system that responds to changes in ways that we can't predict. And so when politicians try and do that sort of stuff, they most often get it wrong. And not to pick on any particular politician, but like Obama, the Obama administration put a lot of money into a solar company called Solyndra.
Right.
And Solyndra ended up going bust. Well, that's the problem, is that people think that making changes in the economy is really easy. Just like they might think, well, when Mao was running China, they were having a big problem with birds eating the crops before they could pick them. And so he encouraged all the farmers to kill as many birds as they could find. And in no time at all, insects took over and destroyed the crops far worse than the birds had been.
Right.
We had a similar problem here in Arizona, near the Grand Canyon and the Kaibab Plateau. I think it was the first President Bush's Secretary of Agriculture thought that too many deer were being killed by predators. So he put a bounty on predators. And pretty soon the deer population exploded to the point where they ate everything that there was to eat and started starving. And they actually had to fly in hay to keep the entire herd from dying off. So yeah, we're not real good at figuring that stuff out. And the same exact thing is true of the economy.
The government.
What?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, you go ahead.
The government does a lot of things in the last, I don't know. I mean, it went from the housing crisis in 2008, which, I suffered on that one. You had these things that have come up, the insurance things were going to fall apart. There was so many things that happened along the way these last few years. Quantitative easing. There's just been so many things that have hit the economy. These big words. What does the economy, or what does the government do really well at screwing things up?
Well, they they screw up a whole lot of stuff. I mean, I would compare it to the environment. What's the best thing we can do for the environment? Don't mess with it. Now, what does that mean in terms of functioning in the world? It means that governments have to keep other people from screwing with it. So it's not just government has to stay out of it. They have to make other people stay out of it as well. So if there's people that want to go out there and just destroy stuff environmentally, you take huge risks with oil spills or taking out forests or whatever, it's an appropriate thing for government to do to stop that from happening. So the goal should be for government to not do anything with the environment, but also prevent others from doing things with the environment that could seriously impact it. Exactly the same thing is true with the economy. The government should completely stay out of the economy. They are not qualified to mess with it because nobody is. But they also have to keep other people from messing with it. It's perfectly legitimate to stop monopolies. People blame capitalism for a lot of stuff, but the reality is there are bad people in every area of life. That's just life. There are bad economists, there are bad poncho hosts, there are bad doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. I mean, there are any area you want, and there's somebody who's not going to do things by the book.
Right.
And it's perfectly legitimate to police those people because those are the people that can mess up the economy. Now, how do you decide who's doing good and who's doing bad? It's really pretty simple. I'm going to paraphrase the Beatles here real quick. And in the end, the value you take should be equal to the value you make.
Ooh. Yeah.
That is what the dream of capitalism is really pretty simple. We help everybody, however we can, find what they're really good at. Now, right now in this country, we're really bad at that. We don't fail enough kids. That sounds terrible.
Right.
But failure is great. It tells you what you're good at and what you're not good at. And those are things that you need to learn if you're going to succeed in life. And so if I fail art and do well in mathematics, that probably says I shouldn't pursue an art degree. I might be better off going into engineering.
Right.
The second thing we want to do is help people find their bliss, find what they really, really love, and then take what they do well and what they love, put those together and use them to create value for other people.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
And that's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
I may sell a few books, you may make an extra sponsorship or two, but that's not why we're here.
No, not at all.
And the other thing about creating value for others is it changes your life. When I got up this morning, I didn't go, oh, I got to go to work today. I got to do a podcast. I was excited about it. I was looking forward to it. I wanted to make it happen. And that's the difference between creating value and working.
Yes.
And that's a big place where we screw up. We teach people they need to work for a living and they shouldn't.
Yeah. I know.
What they should be doing for a living.
No, I completely enjoy this. And you're right. I love doing this. I love speaking to so many people with so many experiences in life. It is just a very rewarding thing. And then just putting it out there for people to watch. I mean, I know I'll never be Joe Rogan, not even Joe Fogan, not even Timu Joe Rogan, but I do it because I enjoy it. And, it brings some value. These so many interesting people in this world, and I love having them on. You talked about, and we've been talking about the government messing stuff up. How does that compare to like a place in China where they planned their economy? They get people like from the minute their birth, they're planning them out, where they're going to work, what they're going to do. And somehow I'm not saying that they're successful. There's a lot of it built on a house of cards, but it seems to be running, and they're planning stuff. So tell me, where does that fail?
Well, Margaret Thatcher said it best. Socialism works until you run out of other people's money.
She did.
And that's just the truth. If you can see that right here in the US. The mayors of New York and Seattle are now socialists. They say they're socialists.
Yeah.
And both of them are having huge problems with companies and well-off people leaving. They're going to run out of other people's money because the people that they want to take the money from are saying, you're not taking it from me, I'm leaving. And so like in Seattle, Starbucks just decided to build a huge plant in Tennessee instead of in Seattle where they'd originally planned to put it. That's going to really hurt Seattle's tax base. And the silly mayor of Seattle, the best she could do was say, well, bye.
She
I mean,
did. Yeah, I saw that.
these people aren't really seriously thoughtful. They don't understand. They haven't studied anything enough well enough to know what the results of their actions are likely to be. And the bottom line is socialism can't work. It's horribly inefficient. And more important, it destroys freedom. As you said, what they have to do in socialism is assign people what to do. Because if they allow people to make free choice, they lose control of the economy. As we talked about earlier, the thing about capitalism is it's messy. And so, because people make choices that we can't predict. And so the way around that is don't let people make those choices. And that's exactly what happens in socialism. They decide, well, we aren't going to let people make any choices because they make choices that mess up our planet. And so what often happens, what's happening in China, what happens in North Korea, what happens in Russia, is you get a thriving black market. And in places like North Korea, if you deal in the black market, the penalty is death. They may kill your whole family, but it doesn't stop people from doing it because people want what they want.
Mhm.
And in the long run, you can't completely stop them.
Well,
And so I think another part of the problem is, in fact, I just wrote an article on it today, is a lack of tolerance for ambiguity. A lot of people that are anti-capitalist are anti-capitalist because they want more order. They are ambiguity adverse. They're afraid of what they don't know, what they don't understand. And so they want somebody to take control. But tons of research has shown over and over again that the higher your tolerance for ambiguity, the more likely you are to be happy.
there are.
It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And you and I both have military backgrounds, and that's kind of the epitome of having to have a high tolerance for ambiguity.
Yes.
When you go into the kinds of situations you go into when you're in the military, you have no idea what's going to happen next. So you have to be very, very tolerant of the fact that you're going to have to change your mind on a dime. You got to keep your head on a swivel and be paying attention to tons of stuff and be ready to react to whatever happens. And so people with those kinds of backgrounds tend to be happier because when stuff goes wrong in life, they don't get too upset about it. Out here in the country where I am, I mentioned that I had to order some things yesterday that I didn't know I'd need. It's because some stuff broke down that I didn't know was going to break down.
Mhm.
And so I had to order stuff to fix it. But it's a thing that when you're out here, you sort of take that in stride. And I think that's part of why people in the country, people that have been in the military, people of faith, all have a higher tolerance for ambiguity. They all tend to say, it's going to work out. I can deal with it. And if I can't, God will.
Absolutely.
But people who live in urban environments aren't used to that. If their toilet breaks, they call the super.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they own their own house, they call a plumber. But that doesn't go out here because the nearest plumber is 50 miles away and is going to charge me a huge amount for a trip. So my wife was talking to her brother the other day, and he couldn't understand why she didn't call him back immediately. And she tried to explain that when you're out here, man, stuff happens left and right all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and you never know what the emergency tomorrow is going to be. But you don't worry about that. You just deal with it when it happens. And so there are a lot of people, and I think particularly you mentioned the young people that in
I
the
was going to go
polls
into
are
that. Yeah.
looking for socialism. I think a lot of it is they're looking for a stability that's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. In fact, it's going to get worse. We are living in a world today that is changing at an unbelievable rate. When my 25, and stayed in it their whole life, that's not going to happen anymore. That's incredibly rare.
Yeah.
In my dad's time, I think my dad probably had 4 or 5 jobs in his lifetime. I've already had like 20.
Right.
And I expect my kids are going to have more than that. And so live in a world where things are changing quickly. And the kind of stability that I think some of the young people are looking for is not stability that's ever going to happen. The only thing we can do to help those young people is to help them understand how to get to a place. And by the way, tolerance for ambiguity is something that's fixable. It's a skill you can work on.
Absolutely.
And so any of the young people out there today that are listening to us, that's what I would suggest you do. You can just do some searches on the internet. You can find out lots about what you can do to increase your ability to deal with ambiguity,
No.
because you're going to have to.
But like one of the things that I've seen with when I talk to even my own kids is they perceive capitalism as failing because they get these insurance bills, and well, these guys that are living in Canada, they get free medical, and they figured out a healthcare system while people are getting bankrupt here for healthcare. And there's people who, how could you live on a minimum wage at $7? That's not helping people. So when you're young, and this, when you're young, you can be altruistic. You can be, want to help other people. That's kind of normal when you're young. You should be that way. You're not really paying for anything. And that kind of, but I don't want to discount their concerns. There are real concerns about them of ever being able to afford a house, etc. So what do you say to kids that think capitalism failed them?
Yeah. I mean, in some respects, they're right. But the problem is it's not capitalism that's failed them, it's government. Virtually every one of the problems that people attribute to capitalism are caused by government intervention. Some of them are caused by lack of government intervention. As I said before, the government has a responsibility to police the economy. That's a good thing. And there's a whole lot of stuff that they could do to do that. The first is don't mess with stuff. For young people, a really good example is in education. The government decided in the 70s that people should go to college. And so they set up a system that would help people go to college. Now, what that did was it flooded the system, the education system, with a lot of extra money. Now, the question is, what happened to that money? A whole lot of it went to buildings. A whole lot of it went to college administrators. Some of it went to college professors. But the actual benefits students got went down. They got a poorer education and a bunch of money thrown into it. And they got a huge amount of debt. When I was a kid, college age, if you went into debt for your education, it was just an insignificant amount, maybe just a little bit. And with a part-time job, you could pay for a lot of it all by yourself. Those days are over. The reason why is because the cost of an education has gone up 8 times more than the cost of living. And that's because the government intervened. Now, they were well-meaning. They were trying to help people. But they did what they too often do. They threw money at the problem. And what happens when you inflate the money supply is you get inflation. And if you inflate the money supply in education, you get inflation. You talked about healthcare. Exactly the same kinds of things happened in healthcare. My grandfather was a physician, one of my grandfathers, obviously. And at the time I knew him, he lived in I think it was a 2 or 3 bedroom house, maybe 1,500 square feet would be my guess. When I last knew him, he had probably a 4-year-old car. He was a long ways from being rich. Now, what happened? Well, the government intervened in healthcare. And so what happened? They threw a lot of money at the problem. And that inflated the cost of healthcare. And so now what happens? Now the pharmaceutical companies make more money The medical practitioners make more money. The buildings are a lot fancier. We get some improvement in patient care due to medical advances, but we don't get improvement in patient care in terms of what your physician is willing to do. My grandfather made house calls. Try and get a doctor to make a house call today. You're dreaming.
Right.
It ain't never going to happen. Now, why not? Because they don't need to do that to make a ton of money because the government threw a bunch of money into it. And so again, the government was trying to help. I'm not saying that the politicians that did that were bad people. They just didn't understand economics. They tinkered in a system they didn't understand and broke it. And so now education and healthcare are two of the worst things for young people. And it's because the government tried to fix it.
Yeah.
And the best thing the government could do to try and fix stuff is stay out of it and put in good solid guardrails. Now, you mentioned earlier the housing crisis in 2008, 2009. That was caused by what we call a bubble, an asset bubble in economics. It happens when people start trying to flip assets. The first one we know about was in Holland in the 1400s, where people started flipping tulip bulbs.
Tulips, the tulip, yes. I know it well.
They found out that they could buy bulbs, keep them for a couple of months, and sell them for more than they. Now, going back to our earlier discussion, does that create value? No. Flipping assets does not create value because you're not creating anything new. All you're doing is buying something, holding it, and selling it. That's exactly what happened in the housing market. There were several other factors involved, including mistakes by government lenders, but a large part of it was people were able to start flipping houses. And so they would buy a house, not improve it in any way, just buy it, wait 2 months and sell it. On my website, I've got a thing called the Federal Long-Term Income Protection Plan, and as a tax. And it's a tax that if they implemented it, nobody would ever actually pay it. Because what it is basically a sliding scale capital gains tax, where if you flip an asset, let's say after a month, almost all of your profit is going to be taxed away. On the other hand, if you keep your asset for 30 years, like say your house, and then you sell it, you're not going to pay any tax on it at all. So there are solutions to these problems. If you want to stop people from flipping stuff and causing housing crisis, you have to make it not pay to do that. It's a simple solution. And there's a lot of things like that. The government does. They try to do things that they're not really capable of doing. When somebody expresses a problem, their immediate reaction is, we've got to do something.
Right.
Whereas many times you don't really need to do something. You need to just stop, think, evaluate the situation more carefully. If I could, go ahead.
As an economist, the other thing that you hear, or I know you hear this because it's all over. Why don't they tax the rich? And I know that you touched on this about the moving money and stuff, but there are concerns by some that the rich are not paying their fair share. Can you explain kind of that concept and why it's wrong?
Yeah, sure. First of all, you'd have to define fair share. And I think most of the people that use those words don't know what that means.
They have no idea.
On one of the articles on my website, and I think it's also in my book, yeah, it is, I use the analogy of going on a hike. And imagine you arrive at a trailhead and you get there and there's going to be 100 people on this hike and they're each going to have 10 pounds of gear. You get there and the sponsor of the hike says, we had a vote earlier and we decided that we were going to apportion all of the gear based on how strong people were. And so we looked at the results of a fitness test that everyone had taken, and we decided that the fittest people would have to carry the most weight, and so on and so on and so on. And we've decided that the very strongest person is so strong that he's going to have to carry 420 pounds. And the next 3 or 4 strongest people will have to carry 120 pounds apiece. And the next 10 or so will have to carry 50 pounds apiece, and so on and so on. And the bottom half won't have to carry anything at all. And that sounds absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the strong people carrying 420 pounds. But that's exactly modeled on the US tax code. The richest people pay 42% of all the taxes. And so to claim that the rich are not paying their fair share is really kind of stupid. They're paying way more than their fair share. I think what the most reasonable taxation system would be a flat sales tax, so that you, in the first place, whatever you tax, you're basically punishing. And if somebody's making money, they're doing so by creating value. So what you're doing is punishing creating value. Well, that's not a good idea, because what you'll do is get fewer people creating value,
Right.
which is the opposite of what we want. On the other hand, with a sales tax, you're taxing consumption. So the rich would still pay more than the less rich because they'd be consuming more. But more than that, it's a fair system. Everybody pays their fair share. The other problem I think people have is that they misunderstand why the rich are rich. And in order to explain that, I've got to go through a little bit of a history lesson. If we look back from the year 1 to the year 1500, per capita GDP, that is a good measure of how much stuff people have, didn't change at all. What that means is for 1500 years, there was basically no human progress. You look back at the way things were in the year 1 and in the year 1500, and you don't see any difference. The same kinds of people were living the same way. Now, what changed? Well, in 1500, we started to see hints of capitalism. So people like James Watt came up with the steam engine and had to go find somebody to lend him the money to help him develop it. That person that gave him the money to help develop it is called a capitalist. They're the people that invest in what entrepreneurs try and do. And that sort of improved things. And in fact, by around 1800, per capita GDP was up 40%. That is, in that 300 years, everybody in the world was 40% better off than they were 300 years ago. That's huge. I mean, that's an amazing change. Now, it got even better, though, because around 1800, the U.S. was coming along. The U.S. was the first country in the world built on capitalism. And obviously, as pretty much everyone knows, the U.S. took off. In no time at all, we were the greatest economy in the world. Now, how was that possible? Because we were committed to capitalism. Now, what effect did that have? Well, as of now, in the entire world, the per capita GDP is 18 times higher than it was in the year 1. That means the average person is 18 times better off than they would have been thanks to capitalism. Now, in the US, Europe, the rest of the developed world, is closer to 40 times better off.
Yeah.
Now, in economics, we call that growing the pie. Between the year 1 and the year 1500, per capita GDP didn't change because the pie, the amount of stuff, stayed the same. So back then, when people thought about the rich, they were right. The rich were stealing from them, because when there's a fixed amount of stuff, the only way to get rich is to take it from somebody else, right? I mean, if the pie is one size and you want a bigger piece, you got to take some of somebody else's. But the way capitalism works is you make the pie bigger so that the entrepreneur and the capitalist get rich, but everybody else gets richer too. For example, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, is a billionaire. He got rich. But Amazon makes every American $2,000 to $3,000 a year better off. That's how much we save every year because he invented Amazon. So why would I complain about how much money Jeff Bezos has when he has given me more money? Free. I didn't have to do anything to get that extra $2,000 or $3,000. It was his gift to me. And He worked hard and got billions of dollars because of it. And so, but too many people are still stuck in the year 1 to year 1500 mindset. They're back in the time when Robin Hood was right. It made sense then to steal from the rich to give to the poor. But now it's a whole different ballgame. The rich are getting rich by giving us money, giving us new stuff, giving us better stuff. Right now, I'm talking to you on a PC. I couldn't be doing this if it weren't for Bill Gates.
Right.
Everything we do with computers are due to people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Yeah, they got rich. Look how much better they made our lives.
Yeah, I always find it.
I'm also talking.
I always find it ironic that there'll be people who make criticisms about capitalism with a $1,500 phone in their hand. Talking about stop the rich, and they have the watch that's $600, and they have the shoes that are $200, and they have all these different things that I didn't see kids enjoying in India when I pulled in a port over there and different places, and they slam capitalism as this horrible, unfair, ugly thing while they're using the fruits of it. Now, I think maybe as an economist, I would like for you to look at this concept and kind of talk about it a little bit, and the concept of fair, because a lot of people, they're looking at it, an increasing amount of people, especially young people, as things are uneven or not fair, not equal. What do you say to people like that see the world that way, see that the system is, they look at it as rigged? What is fair in an economy? Does that fit with capitalism?
Yeah, it's just that their idea of what is fair is what's mistaken. I sort of alluded to it earlier when I said the value you take should be equal to the value you make. And so that's fair. You can't get any fairer than that. The thing that is a problem is what people don't get is the consumer is the decider of value. And so I'm also a musician, and I play gigs frequently. I have a lot of friends that are musicians. A whole lot of them don't make much money. Some of them, that's their day. They don't have a day job. They try and live on that. And it's hard for them. But for most of them, they're okay with that. They're managing to get a living out of doing something they love. Now, what's wrong with that? Nothing. People make choices, and those choices make a difference. In my book, I compare the Beatles and the Grateful Dead. The Beatles made a ton more money than the Grateful Dead did, but I don't think the Grateful Dead are whining about that. They got to do something they really cared about and have fun doing it. And so what if they didn't make as much money as the Beatles? And most of the people that you see that are super rich, that's how they got there. Bill Gates got rich because he loved programming computers and really, really got into it and got good at it. And then went out and created value by inventing Microsoft. I'm talking to you on Starlink right now. I couldn't do that if it weren't for Elon Musk. Elon Musk is just a fanatic for inventing stuff. He's got an amazing mind. He sees problems and says, I think I can do something with that. I mean, and he does just stuff that most people think we're crazy. Building giant boring machines to drill tunnels for subways and putting satellites into space. I mean, these are things that normal people don't think about, but it's stuff that creates value for all of us. Now, I want to make really, really clear. There are people out there that are rich that are bad people. But as we said earlier, there's bad people in every part of life. If bad people are getting rich, doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, the government should stop them. No doubt about that. Too often, though, what happens is, and another example I use in my book, if somebody's burgling my house and I call the police, I see the police come up and I get this sigh of relief. But then I see the police are helping the burglar load my stuff into his car. Too often, that's what happens with government. They do bailouts. They help companies do things that they shouldn't be doing. They shouldn't be helping people make money. We used the example of Solyndra, and that's exactly what happened there. The government took sides and lost a bunch of money, and they shouldn't be doing that. They were helping people that were not creating value. Well, how do I know they weren't creating value? Because if they needed the government help, that meant the consumers weren't buying it. And the consumers are the only ones that get to decide value. People don't understand that. People tend to think that things have value in and of itself. Some of my friends that are musicians that do the least well are jazz musicians. Some of them get a little irate about that. They think, well, jazz is better music, so people should be appreciating it more. And I got to tell them, you know what? The consumer is the boss. You can't tell them that jazz is better than rock and roll. There's no such thing. They're both music. And what happens is people like stuff and they don't like other stuff, and that's the way life goes.
Do you think that people overvalue their labor? Because you talked about creating value, and I wonder if, people overvalue that from your perception.
I'm not sure I'd say overvalue as much as misunderstand. Like I said earlier, people shouldn't think about working for a living. They should think about creating value. And if they're unhappy with the amount of money they're making for what they're doing, they need to step back and say, now, how is it that I'm not creating the kind of value I want to be creating? Why is it? What's going on here? I had a friend that was trying to make a living making jewelry, and it wasn't going all that well. And I tried to talk to him about it. And he ultimately got really upset with me because he didn't like hearing what I had to say. But, I suggested stuff like, well, have you done some market research to find out what kind of jewelry people like? He said, well, no, I make the jewelry that I make jewelry the way I think it should be, and people should like it. And I tried to explain to him that that's not the way the world works, that people aren't going to buy what you think they want. They're going to buy what they want. I was on a podcast not long ago, and one of the hosts said, well, one of the things wrong with capitalism is they get the products wrong. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, when VCRs first came out, Beta was a lot better than VHF.
Yes, yeah.
Whatever, VHF. Yeah. And I said, well, you don't get to make that choice. He said, well, it was a better system. You made better pictures. And I said, well, yeah, but that's not the only thing consumers looked at. They looked at the price. They looked probably, in my view, the biggest difference was recording time. Beta could only record for an hour. VHS could record for 2. If you want to record a movie or a football game, you couldn't do it on Beta. And so that was a huge factor for consumers. And so nobody in the world gets to decide for other people what's valuable. And another way I know that, you've probably had this happen. People have asked me about my military service and wanted to know why I was willing to risk my life. And I said, well, people in the military often have different values. I value duty, honor, country. Those things are really important to me. And I would like to think that if I see a fire in a house, I'm going to be the first one running in there trying to save somebody. And I value those things more than I value my life. And the people I've talked to about that have a really hard time wrapping their head around that. They can't imagine how you could value something more than your life. And I often quote Patrick Henry, who said when he was convicted as a spy, my only regret is that I only have one life to use for my country. And that's a really good example of different people having different values. And more than that, our own values change from day to day. The thing that we thought was really important a year ago might not be seen so important today.
Right.
And so any attempt to try and judge how other people should value things is a fool's errand.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to find out how to make more money, one of the things you want to do is look at things and say, what can I do to create more value? And how can I find out what these people value? Again, in my book, I use an example of somebody working in a fast food place. And he's sitting there just flipping those burgers going, this is a drag. I don't like this. And then one day starts to understand about creating value. So he says, you know what? Now I understand. That guy that just pulled up to the drive-thru is hungry. He doesn't have time to cook or doesn't know how to cook, and he's paying me to do this for him. So I'm going to make him the very best burger I can make. And I'm going to serve it to him as happily and as joyfully. I want to make his day. Now, if this burger flipper starts doing that, I guarantee a couple of things are going to happen. In a week, he's going to start feeling a whole lot better about himself. He's going to start seeing that he's creating value. He's not just sitting there doing some boring job, because he's going to see the reaction on those people's faces, and he's going to see them coming back for more. Probably in a month, his boss is going to start to notice, and he's going to start moving up in the organization. And ultimately, he may end up like the current CEO of Costco, who started out there as a forklift operator 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, he created value for the company. And if that's what you do, you will do well. But again, you have to understand what value is. Now, many times in a company, you're not going to necessarily see the end consumer. The consumer for you might be the other people in your company, the hierarchy. And so you have to create value for them. You have to do what you can to make that company better. And again, if that's your approach, you're going to start feeling better about yourself, and you're going to succeed. If you can't find a way to do that in the company you're in, get out of that company. Go find another
Go
place
somewhere
to
to find value. And there was there's literally a young lady that went on TikTok, and she became a multi-millionaire by making faces to music and moving her head. She made millions and just took off. And that's something that you can do in capitalism. Unfortunately, I'm kind of running out of time, but I did want to ask you, one poignant question. What do you think is the biggest, and I know we talked about forecasting, but as you look at it, as an economist, and you look at the economy in a whole, what is the biggest issue facing America when it comes to economics?
I think it is the threat of socialism. You and I took an oath when we were in the military.
It never expired.
And that's one of the reasons I wrote that book, is that I really think socialism is one of the biggest threats we face. And I took an oath to defend this country from threats. And I consider it my duty to try and prevent this country from becoming more socialist. And I think it's a very real threat. I think my concern is that it would happen accidentally. I don't think anybody in their right mind would vote for true socialism. True socialism is where the government owns the means of production and all property, like North Korea. I don't hear any of the people advocating socialism thinking that what they want is a country like North Korea. They don't know what socialism is. So what they don't understand is that most of the countries that are socialist today got there gradually by tipping their foot in the water, by electing what they thought was a benign socialist. So when Venezuela elected Chavez early on, they thought they were electing somebody that was going to help them and make the world better, make the country better. But it went harder and harder and harder until what they had was a socialist dictatorship. And the same thing could happen here if we're not careful.
Yeah, they used the term democratic socialist. I mean, they dress it up, and that makes it
nonsense.
That makes it sound like it's fat, it's good, it's democratic. Why wouldn't we want democratic socialism, and it's kind of an oxymoron.
It is. It's definitely.
It's impossible.
Socialism and democracy are incompatible.
It's impossible. Now,
Yes.
people can find your book on Amazon, I imagine.
Yes.
Socialism and Why Struggles.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target.
Go out and get that book, folks. Read and learn. And I hope that you got something out of this conversation. Dr. Cardell, thank you so much for coming on my show. Can you stick around real quick afterwards?
Sure, I will. Thank you so much